In this slide, I quote him saying, education is still basically Jim Crow as far as the kids who are in the bottom economic strata of the country. No one knows about them. No one cares about them. And so we see sort of a direct correlation to what was happening in Mississippi. You had large swaths of the Mississippi population who were poor, who were Black, who were sharecroppers or poor workers, and no one cared about them. No one knew about them, but for Bob Moses's work and the work of countless other civil rights activists. And so now he's moving this same needle forward as it relates to education in this country. And his vision for education equality involved teaching poor children, impoverished children, math literacy. He saw that as a way to improve their lot. And so he returns to the United States in the 1970s after former President Jimmy Carter um, gives amnesty to anyone who is a draft resistor, and he continues his doctoral work at Harvard. While doing his doctoral work, he's awarded a MacArthur Genius Award as he comes up with this concept of the Algebra Project. Another quote pulled: everyone said sharecroppers didn't want to vote. It wasn't until we got them demanding to vote that we got attention. Today, when kids are falling wholesale through the cracks, people say they don't want to learn. We have to get the kids themselves to demand what everybody says they don't want. So essentially, we see another direct comparison to what was happening, or I'm sorry, direct correlation between what he was doing in Mississippi in the 1960s and what he sees as important work in the 1980s and 90s with poor children. That if you say a kid doesn't want to do math, doesn't want to do algebra, what you're essentially doing is assigning them to basically an impoverished life or a role where they're not going to be prepared for college, therefore they won't go on to higher education, and then they'll be classified into some low echelon of employment or unskilled labor. So what Moses wants to do is figure out, how do we improve mathematics education to serve these underserved communities? And he saw algebra as a tool for empowerment. If you could increase the test scores and increase college preparedness, then you could help poor and impoverished kids who everybody had written off and forgotten about, help them move up the ladder of life and success. So what was his approach? It involved professional development for teachers. It involved going into schools and looking at what environments look like. He focused on real world applications and critical thinking. And he also involved the community, parents, community leaders, coaches, staff. And most importantly, he got the kids to believe in themselves. In his book, Radical Equations, he talks about the fact that if you want a child to learn, you have to give them something to believe in themselves. And so he says in the 1960s, it wasn't radical to do voter registration per se. What was radical was to mount an insurgency to ensure that Black sharecroppers in the Delta voted. In the morning dawn of the 21st century, it isn't radical to do algebra per se. What is radical is to mount insurgencies to ensure that students at the bottom get the literacies they need. And this is what he believed in. This is the approach, right? Use real world applications. And I will say, full disclosure, the idea to work on this particular presentation about Bob Moses and the Algebra Project was given to me by Merrill Holloway, one of our other educators, said this would be a great piece. And as I was going through some of the literature, what it made me realize is that this was a way that I believe would have been beneficial if I were taught algebra using experiential learning techniques, using real world applications. And it reminded me of sort of the school without walls concept that started in Philadelphia. All right, what's the methodology? He had the Young People's Project, where he used young people to teach other young people, sort of train the trainer. He believed that you got to get children out of the classroom, take them on trips, show them how math and algebra relates to sites around a city, subway stops, historical markers. How do we get from A to B using math, using algebra? These are sort of the real world ways students can conceptualize learning objectives. without just looking at a book and looking at formulas all day in a classroom, he believed that students had to be able to see things in the real world in order to conceptualize them. And he quotes, and another quote I have from him, he says, "People will not follow other people's agendas. Goals have to be internalized." What he meant by that was that students are not just going to follow you because you say they have to learn it. You have to show them how it benefits them. So some achievements and some impacts. There were success stories, both tested by other scholars. There's literature that shows that his method vastly improved math and science literacies. He served over 40,000 plus students across several states, many in the South. And one of the biggest success stories was the Hart School in Bessemer, Alabama, where a poor, impoverished school in less than 3 years was able to outpace a well-funded middle-class school in the same area. He also went on to assist with the calculus project and the idea of democratizing advanced mathematics. And so why this topic? I believe that educators should face inequality head on. We have the power to sort of empower our students, and we can do it in ways that are feasible and radical, just like Moses. And so we need to continue on the tradition of Freedom Summer and involve the students in their own success, just like Moses involved poor Mississippi farmers and non-registered voters in their own success. So Moses passed away in 2021, but his call to action still rings true. We as educators, we have to continue to work for social justice, and we have to find innovative ways to teach and empower our students. I do have some literature that I reviewed here, which I can share with anybody that wants it. Any questions? That's Moses at Freedom Summer, by the way.